are playing with our Daniel Smith Ultimate Mixing Set again. I went ahead and I made a color map, and I also cut a little piece of tracing paper just to help prevent the colors from migrating to the lid. Two very, very simple things you can do just to make this palette a little bit easier. So today we're going to be doing our mud test. And for those of you who are not familiar with this channel, a mud test is when I do 3 layers of watercolor, and we basically test for a couple of different properties. We test to see which colors will lift up and kind of turn to mud on the paper. We also test for opacity, and we test to kind of play around with different color blends. To me, the mud test is a lot of fun, and it really helps introduce me to the possibility of new blends and new techniques. So there are some colors in this set that we know for sure are going to be opaque. We know that the titanium buff is going to be opaque. We know that this yellow ochre is opaque. We know Venetian red is opaque. This color here, wait, this isn't Venetian red. This is probably the burnt sienna. This is probably Venetian red is opaque. So for the first layer, we're going to kind of skirt around using a lot of opaque colors just because we know those tend to turn to mud when you put other colors on top of them. That doesn't mean I'm going to avoid them entirely. And also, you guys might note, I have not done anything to pre-activate these paints, and they seem to activate very, very quickly, which could make them quite ideal for field painting when you have a limited amount of time to work with your paints, and you might not necessarily want to wet them and then wait a while. I'm just kind of working my way across the palette right now. And we are painting on Langton Prestige again. Man, these are some beautiful sunrise colors. This Quin Rose and the Quin Gold play together so nicely. It makes me want to get out and paint with that. And we're able to make a really beautiful soft gray with the ultramarine and the Quin Gold. It's one of the reasons I do this test. Yes, I can also achieve some of this by doing a color mixing chart, but some of it you really only discover by seeing the colors play and intermingle on watercolor paper in sort of real time. Dropping in some cerulean blue. Oh man, the cerulean blue with this red makes a nice kind of stormy purple. Oh, and what a beautiful sort of spring fresh new green the phthalo blue green shade and the yellow make. Another thing I'm kind of testing out is how well these colors, how vibrant these colors dry. I also think this set monetarily is a phenomenal value. I mean, how else are you going to get 15 Daniel Smith colors for $75? That's just, whoa, oh my goodness. So that phthalo green with the Quin Gold, they're just gorgeous together. So for those of you who might be interested in trying out Daniel Smith watercolors, maybe you've played around with the dot cards, you like what you see, you're ready to make an investment. This could be a really great way to start off your collection. All right, I'm going to drip in some of our more opaque colors. And I'm not trying to paint anything representational. I'm really just testing out the colors, seeing how they handle, noting their granulation on different papers, seeing how they mix 1, 2, 3 colors together, just that sort of thing. Okay, so we have our first layer pretty much complete. I'm just going to kind of paint a little bit more, do another layer in a couple of areas. Some of the earth pigments are a little bit slower to react. Like some of these browns are a little bit more bulky. Oh man, those are some beautiful colors in there. Right, now I'm gonna let this dry and then we're gonna start on layer number 2. All right, so our first layer has dried. The colors are still fairly vibrant. Often with watercolor, you'll notice sort of a desaturation as it dries. These remain fairly vibrant. We did lose some of that beautiful color vibrancy. Let's go ahead and start our next layer. And I'm actually gonna start with our phthalo blue-green. And at this point, we're going to kind of test the glazing properties of different colors. So we're going to see how well they layer and what our colors look like after they've been layered. So one of the reasons we do our mud testing on nice cotton rag papers is we want to make sure that we're eliminating as many elements that can go wrong as possible so we can most accurately judge our paints. If I did this on inexpensive cellulose papers, the probability that the paints would lift up immediately is much higher. Cellulose papers also don't really hold on to moisture, to water, as long as cotton rag papers do. They tend to dry out faster, so we wouldn't be able to get some of the blending that we're able to get with the cotton rag papers either. So even though they're much more economical, they really don't allow us to test the properties that we want to test. So when you guys are watching watercolor reviews, or you're reviewing watercolors, or you're considering watercolors for purchase, what are some of the properties you like to see tested? What are some of the properties you're looking for when you buy? And what are some of the things your favorite reviewers do that helps you decide which ones are worth your money and which ones you ought to skip? Let me know in the comments below. So for me personally, I like translucency. I like the ability to do a lot of color mixing without my colors falling out of solution. And I do a lot of layers of color when I paint my watercolor comic pages. So I need colors that can layer without lifting, layer without turning into mud. I need colors that I can mix and they're not going to fall out of solution, they're not going to turn to mud. And I need colors that retain a lot of their vibrancy when they dry. One of the big compliments I get on my watercolor work is that everything is so saturated and so colorful. And that's something that I think a lot of people don't really associate with watercolor, because often watercolor is presented to us as this kind of pastel medium. So for me, colors that are vibrant but still translucent and are not going to necessarily be water reactive. So when I put another layer on top of them, they don't immediately lift back up. That's all properties I'm kind of looking for when I'm testing watercolors and when I'm watching other people's reviews of watercolors. Now the problem is, because I am a watercolor comic artist, most watercolor reviews don't necessarily address my needs as an artist. And that's why I feel like my reviews do offer something valuable. When I do my field tests, I'm bringing my sensibilities as an illustrator. I'm bringing my needs as an illustrator and a comic artist to the table. And those needs differ from people who do like abstract watercolors or people who do fine art watercolors, because I often do more layers than those artists do. And I'm not saying one method is better than the other. I'm just saying that our needs differ. So I try to test with my needs in mind and hope that that helps other artists who are interested in watercolor as well. All right, so this is our second layer. I'm going to let this dry as well. I know the colors look very muddy. That's part of why I call it a mud test. Again, the intention is not to create something attractive or pretty. It's just to slap a lot of paint on the paper and see how it reacts. All right, so our second layer has dried. We're gonna do our third and final layer, and this is where I'm really gonna start pulling out more of the opaque and the semi-opaque colors. It seems like many of these colors have good staining properties, so if you glaze on top of them, they aren't necessarily going to lift up and transfer or turn to mud. But of course, you know, for me, the real test is when I put these to my field tests and when I use watercolors to render an illustration. So if you want to see how well these hold up in sort of a real world scenario, you're just going to have to keep an eye on this channel. Consider subscribing. And often with my field tests, there's a tutorial component as well. So it's a great opportunity to pick up new tips and tricks, learn a couple new things. All right, so we're gonna let this dry and then talk about what we found. All right, art nerds, we've painted 3 layers. We allowed them to dry completely overnight. So now it's time for our verdict. I feel like the colors in the Daniel Smith Ultimate Mixing Set are vibrant. They're colorful, they activate quickly, and they lay down beautifully, particularly on cotton rag watercolor papers. There are several opaque and semi-opaque colors in this set, which can contribute a little bit of cloudiness to your mixes. So that is something you're going to want to consider when you're mixing colors, is that you are dealing with more opaque colors. But overall, they layer beautifully. I didn't have too many lifting issues, and I didn't really have any muddiness issues. So thank you guys so much for watching this mud test. I hope it was useful, helpful, and informative for you guys. I hope you guys will stick around, consider subscribing. I have my field test coming up in the near future that should hopefully answer questions that were not answered by this test or by my first review. As always, it was a pleasure. If you enjoy watercolor content, not only consider subscribing, but think about heading over to natosoup.blogspot.com and check out my wonderful Watercolor Basics series. I have tips, tricks, and tutorials to help get you painting watercolor illustrations and watercolor comics. And speaking of watercolor comics, you should check out my watercolor comics, 7-Inch Kara. It's free to read at 7inchkara.com or 7inchkara.tumblr.com. And let me know what you think of it in the comments below. So thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully I'll see you guys again really soon, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Bye guys!